That April afternoon, spring winds swept through the rows of trees lining Millstone Road, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and roasted corn from the distant county fair. In the quietest corner of the fairgrounds, where metal kennels sat like forgotten luggage, an 11-year-old girl stood, frail, in a worn red hoodie. Clutched tightly in her hands was something few would have noticed. An old tin coffee can, its paint chipped and one side of the lid dented. Inside it rolled loose coins. Birthday money, savings from homemade cookies, and 2 shiny silver dollars her father had left in the mailbox on her 8th birthday, right before he left forever. Lily Walker wasn't there for fun. She had come for something far more important than any toy she had ever dreamed of. Adults, mostly farmers or traders, passed by her with indifferent glances. Some chuckled at the sight of the small girl among the dirty pens, her ears still flecked with straw and the stale scent of thyme. Someone sneered, "That kid thinks she's buying a puppy. These are about to meet their maker." But Lily didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't drift toward the plump, tail-wagging dogs in the first row of pens. She walked straight on, each step hesitant but firm, to an older, quieter cage. There lay a large German shepherd, body gaunt, ribs jutting out like a map of time. One ear drooped, and the other stood stiff as if still trying to hear something long silenced. His once thick coat was patchy, dull, falling out in clumps. But what made Lily stop were his eyes. Not resigned, not hopeless, just still. A kind of stillness that had seen war, walked through the ruin, and now lay here, labeled unclaimed. The makeshift tag beside his cage read simply, Lot 47, K9, male. Former service, no longer active. No one asked about him. The auctioneer brushed past with a tone lacking patience. "This one is 3 years old. Returned to the shelter twice, medical issues. No longer active. Take it or leave it." People smirked. Just another washed-up war dog. But when Lily crouched and gently placed her hand on the rusty bars, the dog opened his eyes and looked right at her. He didn't whine, didn't move, just looked. As if, by a sense beyond instinct, he knew this time was different. In a world that had already closed its doors on him, a small creature stood there and saw not wounds, not failure, but worth unspoken. "What's she trying to do?" a nearby woman whispered. Lily took a deep breath. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "I want to buy this dog." No one burst into laughter, but glances were exchanged, tinged with pity, some with scorn. The auctioneer hesitated. "Kid, he's not like the other dogs." "I know," Lily said. She opened the coffee tin, counting each bill, each sugar-sticky coin, every crumpled dollar. Beneath the silver foil lay her father's 2 silver dollars, shining like small beacons in a world gone gray. "I have $53.40. Is that enough?" The man looked at the crowd, then at her, then at the dog. Silence spread. The dog, perhaps sensing something, slowly pushed himself to his feet, trembling, but didn't fall. The auctioneer sighed. "Sold to the girl in the red hoodie." The gavel came down, not sharply, but enough to close one chapter of a life and start another. Lily didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stepped forward, picked up the frayed collar, and led the dog out of the pens like a soldier being brought home from a long, lonely war. Hattie, still standing there in silence, watched the way the dog looked at her granddaughter and murmured, "Looks like he chose you, too." And the two of them, a girl and a soul, walked across the red dirt path, through a crowd that neither understood nor needed to, under the fading light stretched across their backs, witness to a bond being born, invisible to all but the heart. As Lily's small feet and the dog's still shaky steps crossed the threshold out of the damp kennel yard, the late afternoon sun cast gold over the red dirt road leading to a small house on the edge of Millstone. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. What became clearer than ever was this. The return home wasn't just for a forgotten animal. It was the moment Lily brought back a part of herself she never knew was missing. The cream-colored house nestled beside a patch of wildflowers, its windowsills cracked with age, and one wall stained from last year's rain. It wasn't a rich home, but it held memories tucked away in gentle silences. On the porch sat Hattie Walker, fingers laced, veins raised and sticky with sap from the basket of tomatoes she had just picked. She had once been a vet nurse at an old rescue center, someone who knew the hurried breaths of frightened animals and who had silently guided her old dog across the Rainbow Bridge without tears, only quiet. "Is he gentle?" she asked, not looking away from the sun. "I think so," Lily replied, glancing down. Rex, not yet called by that name, lay stretched across the wooden porch, one leg crossed over the other as if the weight of invisible chains had finally lifted. Inside, Lily's mother, Elena, was cleaning up the remnants of a long day from the kitchen counters. She had once hummed while cooking, but ever since her husband, a firefighter, never came home from his final rescue, that hum had vanished. Now every step she took felt like walking over ashes still warm. She didn't speak much to Lily, not for lack of love, but because that love had been boxed up in worries with no key. When Lily brought the dog inside, Elena paused, not out of surprise, but because something in the dog's eyes stopped her. There was something in them, like her husband's look the day he walked into his last fire, calm despite the unknown. "You bought him?" "Yes, with my savings and Dad's 2 coins. Elena pressed her lips together. She didn't object. She didn't nod either. She simply set the dish on the table and wiped her hands on an old apron. Rex didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't ask for anything. He simply sat there, eyes watching every movement in the house like a veteran stepping into a new barracks, unfamiliar, yet not foreign. His posture was precise, chin resting on his front paws, tail not wagging but placed carefully, as if his whole body still lived by a discipline carved in sacrifice. That night, Lily laid a wool blanket in the living room corner, where her cradle once stood. She guided Rex to lie down, gently running her trembling fingers along his spine. He shivered, not from cold, but because it had been so long since someone touched him with unquestioning trust. She didn't ask, "Does it hurt?" She only said, "I'll be here, as long as you need." And for the first time since he was pulled from the base, Rex let out a long breath, like someone finally unshackled from the inside. Upstairs, Hattie watched through the window slit, eyes tinted with a faraway memory. She had once told Elena, "Some animals don't need medicine. They need to be seen, truly seen, not with eyes, but with something softer." Lily was that kind of child. She had learned love from empty spaces, where people don't reach with words, but with the kind of quiet that stays. Rex drifted into sleep as night fell, undisturbed by dreams. Perhaps, for the first time in years, he no longer had to brace for explosions, commands, or the sound of footsteps that meant abandonment. Only the steady breath of a girl lying nearby, and a hand resting gently on his back, just enough to say, "Here, you belong." That morning, as the first rays of sunlight gently fell on the gray wool blanket in the corner of the living room, the little Walker house remained still, like it was breathing softly in the sleep of 3 generations of women. But under that pale light, a pair of eyes had been awake for a long time. The eyes of the dog who hadn't moved since arriving, once known only as K9, Unit 47, and still unnamed. He didn't whimper, didn't twitch, didn't growl, or scratch the wooden floor like an anxious dog. He just lay there, head resting on his front paws, eyes wide open and alert. The sunlight lit up the patches along his back. Old scars, bald spots, and a faint groove worn deep into his flesh from a training collar long ago, like a tattoo that would never fade. But none of that mattered as much as the way he was looking, quietly, without fear, without calculation. The one he was looking at was the little girl beside him, her arm draped across his back in her sleep. Lily slept as if the world had never given her a reason to be afraid, her small hand resting on the back of a dog once trained to charge into places no person dared to go. That single gesture, though small, awakened something in his mind, as if someone had lit a tiny candle in a long, smoldering dark. The day before, when Lily's gaze first met his at the auction, something had passed between them that no one else could understand. At that moment, his eyes were blank, like a barren field where life had once existed but had been buried for too long. Not fierce, not pleading, just empty and indifferent. But when Lily crouched down, not asking if he was a good boy, not reaching out to pet him, but simply looking, something new had formed. A silence with no name, no language. She hadn't seen a retired, non-operational dog, as his paperwork stated. She saw an old friend forgotten, a fallen soldier left without a hand to help him up. And with the certainty of a child who had learned to love through absence, Lily took out all her savings from the old coffee tin, including her father's last 2 silver dollars, and brought him home. No one understood why. They saw a sick dog, a failing body, a dusty file marked, returned, behavioral issues, no longer on duty. But Lily saw something else. She saw a pair of eyes that had once learned how to wait, so long that others thought they had stopped hoping. That morning, those eyes opened again. But this time, something had changed. Lily stirred, and Rex, the name not yet spoken but slowly finding shape in her heart, turned his head. Not quickly, not fearfully. For the first time in many weeks, his eyes didn't wander to the door or scan the walls. They looked straight at Lily. She opened her eyes, met his gaze, and didn't blink. Between them stretched a silence, delicate as a thread tying past to present, brokenness to hope. "You don't have to do anything," Lily whispered, still heavy with sleep. "I don't need you to be strong. I just need you to stay." Her words didn't fall on him like a command, but like an invitation, an offer to stay, not because he had a job, but because he mattered. That was when his gaze changed, not brightened magically, not like a scene in a movie, but a faint current of life began to flow through the black of his eyes, like grass daring to grow again on a field after the rain. Timid, fragile, but real. Elena stood by the doorway, hair loosely tied at the nape, face bare and worn from years of holding everything together. She didn't step in, just rested her hand on the wooden frame. And when she caught the dog's look toward her daughter, she was struck with a memory. Her husband's gaze, the way he had looked at something no one else saw, only felt. Outside, on the porch, Grandma Hattie stood with her tea, now cold. She didn't speak much. She just looked down with an expression of seasoned hope. "It's begun," she murmured to herself, like someone speaking of a long dormant illness finally finding its cure, or a door slowly opening after too many winters locked shut. Rex still looked at Lily, and this time when she reached out her hand, he didn't pull away, didn't turn his head. He inched closer, just enough for his head to lightly touch her knee. He touched this new world not with teeth, not with fear, but by choosing to cross the threshold again. And in that moment, none of the 3 Walker women needed to say a word. They all knew one honest gaze is enough to save a soul. As the late sun stretched across the porch of the little house in Millstone, its golden light mellowed into a honey hue across the backyard grass. Lily led the dog along the narrow path she had run 1,000 times as a child. It wound toward the far end of the yard, where an old wooden kennel sat, weathered by time, like a piece of memory waiting to be remembered. Rex followed behind her, legs still unsteady. But unlike the moment he was pulled from the transport truck at the auction center, his eyes no longer held confusion. Now, there was something deeper, like he was quietly asking whether this place, this direction, could be meant for him. The sounds of the yard, the wind, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath their feet, The creak of hinges as Lily opened the kennel door no longer startled him. Each sound felt familiar, like they'd been waiting for his return. The old wooden kennel had been built by Lily's grandfather, a quiet man known around town for his skillful hands. He'd made it from rough pine, roofed with dark tin, once the home of the family's first dog, Lucky, a gentle retriever who passed away when Lily was 4. Since then, the kennel had sat empty, weeds climbing to its threshold. No one had the heart to tear it down, as if everyone sensed it would one day be needed again, for someone who deserved more than most. That afternoon, Lily stepped inside with her most precious item in hand, a cream-colored wool blanket, old but clean, her constant comfort on rainy childhood nights. That blanket was more than fabric. It was a memory keeper, a soft fortress where dreams were safe when the world outside grew too large. Lily spread it gently across the cold wooden floor, smoothing every fold like she was making the bed for a soldier come home from a long, exhausting war. "I don't know where you've been," she said softly, still kneeling over the blanket. "But from now on, this is your home." Rex didn't enter right away. He stood at the threshold in a shaft of fading light that cast his scarred body in sharper detail. The long one behind his left leg, the bald patches dotting his flank. His body bore a map of all the times he'd been left behind, the moments he hadn't been chosen, the wars he'd fought without recognition. But now, his gaze wavered, not quite trusting, not surrendering either. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he was weighing whether this place might truly be safe enough to stop running. Then Lily did something he didn't expect. She stepped back. She left the doorway and sat down on the grass, a few feet away, giving him the right to choose. She didn't coax, didn't call, didn't tempt him with treats. She simply sat and waited, and let him see that entering that space was entirely his. And it was that tiny freedom that made something huge happen. Rex lowered his head and took one step in. The wood creaked beneath him. Another step. Then he paused, sniffed the blanket, and finally, with a slow motion as if testing muscles long forgotten, he curled up, rested his head, drew in his limbs, and closed his eyes. Lily sat still outside, not daring to move. She didn't want to break the moment. In her heart, something burst open, not with sound, not with tears, but with the deep certainty that she had just done the rightest thing she'd ever done. From the kitchen window, Grandma Hattie looked out, teacup suspended mid-air. Elena walked over, following her mother's gaze, and smiled, a rare smile since losing her husband. "He chose to stay," Elena said quietly. "No," Hattie corrected, her voice low and warm. "He was allowed to stay." Rex lay still in the kennel, but his ears twitched. Maybe he heard. Maybe he didn't. What mattered was that he no longer saw this place as temporary. He saw it as a beginning. On the wall of the kennel hung an old hook. Lily took a black collar she'd found in her toy box and hung it there, not to restrain him, but to mark that he belonged. The breeze made the tag jingle, soft as nighttime music. No one had said his name yet. But in that moment, as Lily spread the blanket and said, "Home," he had already begun to become someone no longer unnamed. The echoes of the afternoon still lingered faintly across the backyard as Lily sat silently in front of the old wooden kennel, eyes fixed on the curled-up shape of Rex inside. The kennel, once just an old wooden structure, had become a sacred space, a place where two wounded souls had, for the first time, found each other in the same rhythm of breath. Hugging a pillow to her knees, Lily sat on the soft grass, her hair falling gently to her shoulders, while the early moonlight perched quietly on the slope of her small frame. Rex remained motionless, not out of fear, but because he was listening. In the stillness filled only with chirping crickets and the soft rustle of leaves above, the old canine's breathing was steady and deep, each inhale seeming like a question. Is this place safe? With every breath, he took in the scent of freshly cut grass, old wood, soft fabric still carrying a trace of childhood powder, and most of all, the scent of Lily. A scent unfamiliar, yet not strange, as if somehow he had known her in another life, where unspoken promises could still reach the deepest parts of the heart. When Lily slowly extended her hand through the kennel door, not quickly, not commanding, but as a respectful invitation, Rex turned his head. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but volumes passed between them. It wasn't pity. It wasn't overly sentimental. It was a meeting of scars, one inside, one outside. Rex gently lifted his head from the blanket and rested it on Lily's leg. A simple act, but for a K9 dog discarded like excess equipment, it was the breaking of a monumental wall, the wall of betrayed trust. Lily held her breath, then exhaled slowly. She didn't rush to pet him like other kids might. She didn't giggle with excitement. Instead, she lowered her head, brushed aside a loose strand of hair, and whispered, her voice barely louder than the breeze, "I won't let anyone leave you behind again." The words drifted like breath, but carried a weight heavier than any grand vow. Because no soul that's been betrayed needs dramatic promises. Only one commitment, strong enough not to shatter. The moon rose higher, its silver light laying gently across the kennel like a thin blanket. A breeze made the old collar hanging at the door jingle faintly. Not a loud sound, just a soft chime echoing in thought. Somewhere in a distant memory, Rex had heard that sound before. Back on the training ground, when his young handler returned from a night shift and threw his arms around him, calling him by a name he no longer heard. But now, in the steady breathing of the child beside him, Rex heard something else. Not a command, not a drill, but a heartbeat. A small, warm, patient heartbeat. And it asked nothing of him. No performance, no service, only presence, like life itself. That night, Lily didn't go inside. She asked her mother if she could sleep on the porch. Grandma Hattie only nodded, while Elena laid out a thin mattress and a spring blanket. Lily curled up on the wooden porch, right beside the kennel. Not to guard, but to keep her first promise. You won't be alone again. Rex woke many times during the night, each time triggered by a fragment of memory. Bombs, sirens, footsteps running across hot sand, growls behind barbed wire. But this time, there were no echoes of war in his ears. Only the soft, steady breath of a sleeping child, a sound so gentle it bordered on sacred. And for the first time in years, Rex drifted into sleep, not in a state of alert, but in something else. The posture of a soul is finally trusted and needed. Dawn arrived quietly, as if it too understood that something fragile and sacred had just begun here. The early light didn't blaze. It crept gently through leaves, settled on dewdrops in the grass, and kissed the wooden roof of the small kennel, where a story was unfolding through fresh breaths. Lily woke not to a noise, but to a rare kind of silence. A silence only those who've known deep loneliness can recognize as different. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, the thin blanket slipping from her shoulders, leaving a patch of cool morning air. In front of her, through the cracked open door, Rex was sitting. Not lying down, not turned away like guarded dogs often do, but sitting properly, facing the porch, facing Lily. The small bowl of water she had left the night before was half empty. That meant Rex had drunk. Not from necessity or pressure, but from trust, however faint. It meant he had chosen to stay. Lily stood up and walked toward him, each step slow. The morning sun lit her from behind, painting her hair and pajamas with soft light, making her look like a figure sketched from the dawn. When she called gently, "Rex?" he turned to look at her immediately. And in that look, Lily paused. Not out of fear, but because something stirred in his eyes. A fragment of memory is still intact, still unseen by anyone else. His gaze was no longer hollow, nor yet fully healed, but it had begun to shed the heavy mask left by war, pain, and abandonment. He didn't come forward, nor did he retreat. He just sat, head held, waiting. And in that waiting, Lily understood. Rex was asking her something, a question only the heart could answer. Does your promise still stand in the light of a new day? Was last night just a moment? Or the beginning of something real? Lily came closer and knelt. She didn't rush to hug him. Instead, she took from her pocket a small biscuit, a buttery cookie Grandma Hattie made every weekend. Its scent made Rex tilt his head slightly. A small movement, but to Lily, it was a quiet yes. She placed the biscuit on her open palm, saying nothing more, letting Rex choose how to respond. Rex slowly stood, each step a silent negotiation between survival instinct and the yearning to trust again. He lowered his head, his wet nose brushing her palm, then gently licked the cookie. No panic, no fear. He swallowed, then looked up at her. And his eyes, at that moment, were no longer just a dog's eyes. They were the eyes of a soul that had fought, had been forgotten, and was now beginning to remember how to live as part of something greater than himself. Lily whispered, "Do you remember your name?" "Rex?" And strangely, he reacted. His neck tilted and the ear that once drooped gave a slight flick. No one had taught Lily how to call a former military dog. But somehow, her voice, not loud, not commanding, made Rex a name he recognized, not with logic, but with a buried instinct. A change, fine as thread, slipped into the air. The world around them seemed to quiet, to honor this moment, when a dog no longer responded to commands but began to respond to love. Rex licked her hand once more, this time not for the cookie, but to affirm something even he couldn't yet name, that this child wasn't like the others. Not a handler, not a trainer, not a vet, but a friend, a small soul with the power to hold his broken heart with unconditional gentleness. He sat beside Lily for the first time by choice. He didn't scan for exits. He didn't brace for orders. He just sat, head slightly tilted toward her, eyes blinking slowly as if asking, "What now?" And Lily, with her small hand, reached up and stroked his head. Softly, slowly. "Now we start over, okay?" Rex exhaled, then lowered his head into her lap, a position no K9 would assume unless their guard had truly fallen. And in that moment, the first light wasn't just sunlight over the yard. It was the warm, patient glow of trust being reborn in a heart that had once turned to stone. The first few days after Rex became part of the Walker family unfolded in a quiet, warm rhythm. He no longer flinched when someone approached, and he no longer curled up with his face to the wall like the first day home. Instead, Rex had begun dozing in the sun, listening to Lily read aloud in the afternoons, and letting out a soft whine whenever she disappeared behind a closing door. But Lily's world wasn't just the sunlit garden and the beloved wooden kennel. It also included the long hallways of Millstone Elementary, where kids often lived freely, sometimes too freely, to the point of cruelty. That Monday morning, Lily came to school with her backpack, its strap restitched by her mother the year before. Inside, along with books and notebooks, she carried a small, folded slip of paper, the information sheet about Rex she had picked up at the auction. The italicized line, "Rex K9 unit honorably retired," was fading from how often she carried it, like a sacred reminder of what she now protected. In art class, when the teacher asked students to draw what they cherished most, Lily didn't hesitate. She drew Rex, his tangled gray-black fur, sad but resilient eyes, and beside him the small wooden kennel beneath the willow tree. She colored each detail carefully, gently pressing the wax crayons, as if willing the world to see Rex the way she did. But not everyone understood. As the bell rang and a group of older kids walked by her desk, one of them, Josh, the kind of boy who needed to be the center of attention, snickered at her drawing. "What kind of dog is that? Horror movie reject?" Another chimed in, "Zombie dog. Look at those teeth and eyes. He's about to fall apart." The group erupted into laughter. A few nearby students peeked and giggled quietly. Lily didn't respond. She simply flipped her drawing over, palms cold, the soft morning smile fading like watercolors ruined by spilled water. Since her father died in the line of duty, Lily had learned how to swallow pain in silence. But what tightened her throat now wasn't the teasing. It was the way Rex, a warrior who had once risked his life for people, was now seen through careless, shallow eyes. They didn't know that this dog had led teams through the darkness, sniffed out explosives before anyone noticed, and laid beside the dying just to hold them in life a little longer. Then, a voice rang out, firm and clear. "Leave her alone, Josh. You don't know anything about canine dogs." Lily looked up. It was Luke, the quiet boy who always sat in the back of the class with a beat-up sketch pad and a worn-down pencil. He stood just a few steps from Josh, his gaze steady and unflinching. Josh sneered. "What, you another fan of ghost dogs?" Luke didn't flinch. He walked over to Lily's desk, gently turned the drawing face up again, studied it, and nodded. This time, he spoke not to Josh, but to the whole room. "My brother was saved by a dog like that, in Fall Creek. The dog lost a leg to a mine but didn't run. He stayed by my brother for 2 hours until rescue came." Silence blanketed the classroom. "Canine dogs aren't pets, they're soldiers. You guys look at fur and cloudy eyes, but you don't see courage, loyalty, or what they've given up." No one replied. Even Josh looked away, suddenly unsure, then wandered off to another corner. As the room settled back into routine, Luke turned to Lily and carefully placed her drawing back on the desk. "You got the eyes right. They look like they're telling a story." Lily nodded softly, her lips trembling with emotion. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in loving Rex, in believing in something others called foolish. That afternoon, when she got home, Rex was already lying by the porch, as if he knew the exact time she'd return. She sat down beside him, leaned against the doorframe, and told him all about Luke, the drawing, the words he said. Rex didn't understand the words, but he tilted his head, and his gaze, deep and steady, warmed with the last light of day on her shoulder. From her bag, Lily pulled out the small pin Luke had slipped her after class, a badge showing a K9 dog standing proud in front of a flag. She pinned it to her collar and whispered, "Today I learned something, Rex. Not everyone will understand you, but someone will. Someone will stand up for the truth, like I did for you, and like you once did for the whole world." In Rex's aged but still searching eyes, he looked at her as if to say, "I'm still here, and I understand more than anyone. The pain of being mocked, and the courage it takes to stay anyway." After school, Lily didn't head straight home like she usually did. Instead, she lingered by the old tree behind the school library, carefully folding the page Luke had copied from his brother's old K9 training manual, a former soldier who had served with dogs overseas. The yellowing page, faded in places, listed commands in bold font: sit, stay, guard, track, speak. At the bottom, scribbled in shaky handwriting, was a single line: "Once loyal, their hearts never forget." Lily stared at that line for a long time. Sometimes it was hard to believe that such dry words had once meant life or death on a battlefield. But with Rex, the discarded dog who seemed to have forgotten everything, she believed it was still there. Not in clear memories like humans have, but in instinct, in the body once trained for purpose and connection without words. By the time the sun sank low, casting a pink-gold glow over the distant fields, Lily returned home. After helping her mom with dishes and checking on the neighbor's sick cat with Grandma Hattie, she quietly walked toward the kennel at the back of the yard. Rex lay with his back to the door, head resting against the wooden frame. The kindergarten blanket she'd laid on his first night still sat there, though worn. It still carried her scent, a scent he had grown to know and no longer shied away from. She approached slowly, the training page clenched in her jacket pocket. "Rex," she called softly, voice as light as the breeze. He lifted his head. One ear twitched, eyes opened, Not panicked anymore, not fully trusting either, but waiting, as if he knew what it meant when someone called your name from the dark. Lily sat down and placed the page in front of her. Sunset poured over her shoulder, casting her shadow across the patchy grass. She didn't rush. She simply looked at him. Rex didn't move, but he watched every motion, head tilting slightly. A gesture once familiar, now surfacing like something old being summoned again. Lily took a deep breath, then spoke the word, not as a command, but as if whispering the name of something sacred, long buried. Guard. Silence. The wind stirred, rustling the paper. Rex didn't budge, but then, after 2-3 seconds that felt like a held breath, he shifted. Slowly, like each movement was a rusty door creaking open in his mind. He stood. Not sharply, not stiffly, just calmly lifted himself off the ground, braced his back, and stepped forward, placing himself between Lily and the open space behind her. His head rose, ears alert, eyes scanning the horizon. It wasn't a pose of aggression or showmanship. It was instinct. The instinct of a soldier trained to understand, when the call comes, you stand guard. Lily said nothing. Her throat tightened. Time paused. Every sound, the distant hum of traffic, the wind through branches, faded under the weight of something deeper. Awakening. She repeated it, softer, but with more conviction. Guard. Rex didn't look back. He pressed his paw down into the earth, as if to say this place, this moment, was where he stood. Not for a commander, but for someone who believed in him. He was no longer surplus. He was the sentinel. Lily's tears came. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth that flickered in his eyes. A light too faint to name, but one that said, he remembered. And if he remembered, then he was never lost, just waiting for someone to help him find the way back. She leaned forward and gently stroked from his shoulder down his spine. His coat was rough, coarse, patchy, but beneath it she felt warmth returning. Not just heat, but blood, awareness, loyalty, waking. Grandma Hattie, watching from the kitchen window, slowly lowered her glasses. She had seen countless animals fade in silence. But this was a miracle not born of medicine, needles, or protocols. It was a connection that defied language. And she knew that if anything could heal a wounded heart, it was unconditional trust. That night, Lily opened her journal for the first time in months and wrote, "Today, he stood up. Today, he guarded me. But more than that, I think he guarded something broken in himself and started putting it back together. I'll stand with him too. That's the promise." That night, after writing her first journal entry in purple ink, Lily sat by the window for a long time, chin resting on her hands, eyes fixed on the wooden kennel at the end of the yard, where Rex had returned to his usual resting spot. On the cool ground, he curled into a quiet shadow. But if Lily whispered his name, his ears would perk, and those eyes would scan the dark, searching for her. The next morning, the weather turned unseasonably warm. A spring breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the backyard, and Lily decided it was time to bathe Rex. He had been living with them for nearly a week. Though still cautious, he had begun to allow her hands to linger longer, touch deeper, as if he understood those small hands only wanted to scrub away the sorrow clinging to his fur. Lily prepared warm water in a large aluminum tub beside the porch, lined it with towels, and brought out an old wooden brush of Grandma Hattie's, the one used for the neighborhood's aging cats. When she called, Rex came slowly, no longer defensive, just careful, like someone used to danger learning how to relax again. Kneeling beside him, Lily gently lathered soap across his back. He stood still, only flinching occasionally as water touched his thick skin, exposing patches of thinning fur. Under the fading foam, scars began to emerge, long marks running from shoulder blade to left hip, deep gashes healed over but still clear as a map of the past. Her hands froze. All movement stopped. Rex looked at her. Not growling, not pulling away, but his eyes dimmed slightly as if he knew she'd seen something that couldn't be unseen. Lily leaned closer, fingertips searching until they found a small mark on his right ear, a faded tattoo blurred by time. K9-4712-Bravo. Letters quietly stamped into his skin, like a whisper from a past that once carried life and death meaning wrapped in short commands and loyal eyes. She ran into the house to call her grandmother. When Hattie stepped outside, eyes seasoned by years of tending wounds, she only needed a glance before nodding. No need to research. No further questions. "He was part of a unit," she said, placing a steady hand on Lily's shoulder. "That's a Bravo unit code, specialized in overseas combat zones. These scars, Lily, they're not from accidents." Lily lowered her head, clutching the towel in her lap. Something rose in her chest. Not fear, but reverence. A deep, quiet respect for the being standing before her. A being who bore no complaint, no regret, only the quiet memory of a life spent protecting humans, and being forgotten by them. Grandma Hattie sat beside her, gently stroking Rex's back. "See this long gash here? Probably shrapnel. And the back leg. Looks like it healed wrong after a fracture. But look at him, Lily. He's still standing, still walking, still moving through days that others believed he had no strength left for." Lily swallowed hard. She understood now. Rex wasn't just an abandoned dog. He was a warrior returned, with no one waiting. A forgotten sentinel on the fringes of the world. And now, she, just a girl with a coffee tin and a brave heart, was the only one seeing the light still in his eyes. That bath didn't just clean the dirt from his coat. It was the first time Lily truly saw the past he carried. Not through words, not barks, but in every scar, every tattoo, every uneven breath that spoke of a lifetime of service. And that afternoon, as Rex lay on the backyard lawn, head resting on Lily's leg, eyes closed in the soft streaks of sunset, she leaned down and whispered, "I know what you did, and I'm proud you're here." Rex didn't react dramatically, but a long, soft exhale escaped him, and for the first time since arriving, his tail gently stirred against the grass. A warrior doesn't need medals, only to be trusted once more. Early spring in Millston brought light afternoon rains, lacing the porch with the smell of damp earth and the sound of the wind playing through the wooden fence. Rex, or Shadow, as Lily was about to learn, seemed to change with the moisture in the air. He no longer retreated to corners at sudden sounds, nor growled when someone approached. Every morning, he sat on the front porch, eyes fixed on the dirt road, as if waiting for someone from a distant past to reappear. One Saturday afternoon, Luke came by with a USB stick and a stack of printed documents from his older brother's high school library, where the boy had once trained before enlisting. Luke said little, only giving Lily a look like he carried a great secret. They sat in the corner of the kitchen by the small wooden table, opened Grandma Hattie's old laptop, and plugged it in. "You're sure about the ID?" Luke asked, pointing to the faded ink inside Rex's ear. "K9-4712-Bravo. Lily nodded. She had memorized every digit, every letter, like a code she needed to solve to save the soul in front of her. The first website was a forum for U.S. veterans, dedicated to dogs of war. One link led to an old post, dated November 2017. Title, "Shadow Bravo Unit, Lost but Never Forgotten." Lily's heart pounded. She scrolled slowly. The opening photo showed a German shepherd sitting upright beside a young soldier. Both stared into the camera. The dog's eyes struck her. It was Rex. No, it was Shadow. That gaze, sharp, steady, filled with trust and duty. The eyes of a warrior. The post told his story. Shadow was one of Bravo Unit's top MWDs, military working dogs, trained for bomb detection and convoy protection in Kandahar, Afghanistan. In October 2017, the unit was ambushed. Sergeant Thomas Greer, Shadow's handler, was trapped under rubble after an explosion. Witnesses last saw Shadow charging into the smoke toward Greer just before a second blast hit. When the smoke cleared, Shadow was gone. Nobody found, only a burned piece of leash and scraps of armor. He was presumed KIA. Lily clenched her hands. Dizzy, heartbreaking. A dog once honored like a soldier, who saved a man's life, disappeared without a trace, and somehow quietly drifted here to end up as leftover inventory at a backlot auction. Unrecognized. Luke flipped through the printed pages. One was a commendation. For extraordinary bravery and dedication to duty, MWD Shadow is awarded the K9 Medal of Valor, posthumously. Posthumously. Awarded after death. But Shadow hadn't died. He had survived. Wandered through who knows how many states, rejected by people who called him too old, aggressive, and useless. And now, curled beside an 11-year-old girl, he was finally remembering who he once was. Suddenly, Lily felt something behind her. She turned. Shadow stood at the kitchen door. His eyes were no longer cloudy but lit by something familiar. Not the wary gaze of the abandoned. Not the hollow stare of the lost. For the first time, Lily saw something return. Like someone waking from amnesia, hearing their name spoken aloud. Shadow? She called softly. He didn't move for a second. Then, with a deep, silent breath, he stepped forward and sat beside the table. No barking, no sudden reaction, but his head dipped gently, his tail moved slightly. Luke whispered, "You see that? It's like he's hearing his real name for the first time in years." Lily nodded, throat tight. "Shadow," she said again, this time like a promise. "You saved someone. You didn't disappear, and now I'll be the one to remember that for you." Shadow closed his eyes and let out a long breath, as if exhaling years held in since that battlefield, since wandering unnamed and unloved until now, when someone finally saw him for who he was. Lily reached out and touched his head. No hesitation, no retreat. He leaned into her hand, accepting the touch as if it were the return of his name itself. That night, in her purple journal, Lily wrote just one line. "Your name is Shadow, and the heart you lost is beating again. Here, in this little house at the end of Millstone Street." The name Shadow echoed softly from the past, but when spoken aloud in the warm kitchen of the Walker home, it did more than awaken buried memories in Rex's aged eyes. It planted a new idea in Lily's heart, one she couldn't let go of. She now knew he wasn't just another nameless dog. And now that Shadow had a name, someone to call him, and a place to return to, his past deserved to be remembered. Properly, truthfully, and with reverence. Lily began gathering every piece she could find. She asked Luke to reprint the old article from the Veteran Forum, carefully cutting out the only surviving photo of Shadow with his handler, Sergeant Thomas Greer. In the picture, the German shepherd stood close to the soldier's leg, his eyes fixed forward, his chest like a shield. Greer smiled, the kind of smile worn by someone who knows they're being guarded with every breath. One evening after dinner, Lily sat alone in the living room, where her father used to play the mandolin on Sundays. She laid the file on the table beside the dim oil lamp. Outside the window, Rex, now Shadow, curled up in the wooden kennel, no longer shrinking away. Since his name had been spoken again, he had slept more deeply. Lily noticed fewer dream tremors and fewer startled jumps at sudden sounds. Maybe he was beginning to believe that this time, he was truly safe. She opened her notebook with the purple cover, its first page titled Shadow's Journey, and began to write. To the Fort Hardwell K9 Division, my name is Lily Walker, I'm 11 years old, and I live in Millstone, Virginia. Recently, I attended an animal shelter auction and adopted an elderly German shepherd listed as Rex. But from the faded ID tattoo on his ear, I believe his true name is Shadow, of Bravo Unit. I found a post on a veteran K9 forum that said Shadow served in Afghanistan and was believed to have been killed in action while rescuing his handler, but he survived. Even though he's old, he still walks beside me every day. He still watches over me when I step into the yard. I don't know if his handler, Sergeant Thomas Greer, is still there. But if he is, please tell him. Shadow is still alive, and I believe he's still waiting to hear his name again. I'm not a vet. I'm not a soldier. I'm just a girl who believes that sometimes the only thing needed to heal a soul is to be seen and remembered. I hope this letter finds its way to the right person. Sincerely, Lily Walker. It wasn't a long letter, but it carried everything Lily believed, that if a dog could remember his name, he could also remember love and loyalty, the kind that once burned bright inside him. The next morning, Lily woke early, put on her father's old khaki jacket, and rode her bike to the tiny post office at the edge of town. She dropped the letter into the red mailbox, the stamp already fixed, the address written carefully, Fort Hardwell K, 9 Division, Missouri. She lingered there for a while, not because she feared going home, but because she wanted to hold on to the moment. A rare moment when you believe in something bigger than yourself, even without proof. That night, soft rain misted the windows. Lily sat beside Shadow's kennel with a small flashlight and the K9 training manual Luke had given her. She flipped to the section, Bonding Through Voice, and read aloud. "Shadow," she whispered, "I sent the letter. If we're lucky, the one you once waited for will know you never really disappeared." Shadow lifted his head and rested his chin on her leg as if understanding that he was finally going to be remembered. Not by a serial number, not by a dusty medal, but by a heart that refused to forget. Lily added a line to her journal. This letter isn't just to find someone. It's to remind the past that it was never meaningless. And in that little home, under the soft yellow lamp, a girl and an old dog waited, not for a reply, but for something deeper, for the moment when the past finally finds its way back, so the future can begin. Wednesday afternoon brought a soft sun. Long streaks of white clouds lay across the blue sky like threads on paper. Lily brought Rex to school, as she always did. His leash was securely looped around his neck, though never pulled tight. He walked beside her in quiet, steady steps, so calm you'd never guess this creature had once stood in fields of red dust and gunfire. It had been nearly a month since the auction. Though the road to healing was long, Rex, now Shadow, had slowly begun finding his rhythm again. Not the instinct of combat, but the reflex of love. Each morning, he sat quietly by the school bench, waiting for Lily to finish her first lesson. She had permission to let him stay near the back of the school grounds, near the storage shed, where Luke had laid down an old rug in the shade. Shadow never barked, never ran. When teased by curious kids, he retreated. When stared at, he merely glanced. Even Principal Margot, once stern and distant, had stopped objecting after Lily explained that he was a retired military dog. Everything was going right, until that day's fire drill. There was no warning. The siren ripped through the air during recess. First, a piercing screech from the intercom, then 3 loud simulated bangs echoed from the gymnasium, where a safety drill was in progress. At that moment, no one noticed how Rex's powerful body froze, ears erect, back tense like a wire being pulled tight. His once dulled eyes snapped into a cold alertness. Then, like a buried command had been detonated deep inside him, Shadow launched forward toward the noise. "Rex, no!" Lily shouted, but he was already gone, bounding across the schoolyard like the world around him had vanished. Principal Margot nearly fell as the large dog surged toward the gym. A few kids screamed and backed away. One teacher reached to stop him but pulled back instantly at the sight in Shadow's eyes. Not madness, but laser focus. The kind of look only warriors carry when they're about to run into where others run from. Shadow didn't attack anyone. He halted at the gym entrance, body low, eyes scanning, chest rising and falling in deep bursts. His stance was unmistakable to any who'd seen a working dog on duty, but to the unaware, it looked like a threat. A security guard rushed toward him, ready to intervene, just as Lily arrived, breathless, eyes filled with tears. "He's not trying to hurt anyone," she shouted. "He thought it was real. He thought someone was in danger." No one responded. No one truly understood, except for Luke, who elbowed his way through the crowd holding a color printout from the school library. It was a grainy photo of Shadow in combat gear from the veteran's site. "I'm telling the truth," Lily sobbed, voice cracking. "He's a K-9. From Afghanistan. I sent a letter. They'll write back. They'll prove it." Principal Margot, usually firm and unreadable, stared at Lily. She no longer saw a stubborn girl clutching a stray. She saw a child trying to protect the only thing holding her belief together. "All right," she said softly. "I won't make a final decision today, but from now on, he cannot be near the main building or attend large school events until we get a formal behavioral assessment. Understood?" Lily nodded, still shaking. She didn't say thank you. She just knelt beside Shadow, now calm again, eyes still scanning the gym doorway, checking if the threat had passed. She wrapped her arms around his neck, not like a child hugging a pet, but like a soul clinging to what's left after the storm. "I don't blame you," she whispered into his fur, "because I'd do the same thing if Mom or Grandma were in danger. So thank you for still being brave." That night, Luke brought her a folder of materials about PTSD in military dogs. They read together under the kitchen light. Each sentence mirrored Shadow's journey, the nightmares sparked by a click, the tension triggered by loud echoes. Not madness, but memory. And outside, on the old wooden porch, as the night wind rustled the boards, Shadow lay silently, eyes half closed, ears twitching gently, still guarding, not because he was told to, not because it was expected, but because, in his heart, the mission had never really ended. A week had passed since the fateful drill in the schoolyard, and the tension in Millstone seemed to have settled somewhat. The questions surrounding Rex had lost their edge, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. For Lily, every night felt like a stretch of waiting. She longed for a response from Fort Hardwell, the way one waits for the dawn after a storm. Not certain, but full of hope. Then, on a Friday morning, as the mist still clung to the eaves, a sand-colored military vehicle quietly pulled up in front of the Walker's house. Its wheels touched the gravel path softly. The engine fell silent, leaving behind a taut stillness. Lily was feeding Rex when a knock sounded at the door. She looked up and saw the silhouette of a man in a crisp uniform, salt and pepper hair, and eyes honed sharp by discipline. He introduced himself as Captain Thomas Greer, from the unit responsible for the post-war rehabilitation of military working dogs. He had received a letter from Lily, not through standard administrative channels, but via an internal handoff, thanks to a veteran who had come across it and been moved. That letter, written in a schoolgirl's hand, simple yet sincere, had bypassed bureaucracy and landed directly on the desk of the man who once signed the order to declare Shadow missing in action years ago. Lily invited him in, her eyes a mix of hope and caution. Rex, sensing something, stepped out from his kennel and stood still beneath the porch. When his eyes met the uniform, something shifted. Not fear, but alertness, as if memories buried deep had stirred. Captain Greer knelt slowly, bringing himself to Rex's eye level, not too close. He said the dog's old name, Shadow, not as a command, but as a recognition that the past still mattered, still existed. Rex didn't react immediately. He merely tilted his head slightly, as if the name no longer belonged to him. He was Rex now, Lily's companion, the silent guardian of a porch swept by the wind. After speaking with the family and reviewing Rex's behavior reports from the school, Captain Greer proposed, not to reclaim the dog, but to retrieve him to the base for a full health check, psychological evaluation, and a decision on whether he might be retrained or redirected toward another purpose. In the military's eyes, Rex, Shadow, was still an asset, one that hadn't been properly decommissioned. "We're not here to make things difficult for you," he said softly, looking at Lily. "But this dog, he has a long history. Caring for him requires specialized knowledge, especially after severe PTSD and combat disassociation. If he stays, there are risks. We can help him. Elena, Lily's mother, sat beside her, holding her hand. Mrs. Hattie stood quietly in the back, arms crossed, eyes never leaving Rex. Everyone in the house understood this was a turning point. Not just a question for a child, but a decision for a family who had opened their hearts to a soul full of scars. Lily didn't speak for a long moment. She looked at Rex, now lying on the porch step, head resting on his front paws, eyes gazing silently at the distant woods. She remembered the first night he laid his head on her lap, how he responded when she whispered, "Guard," and the silent hug she gave him after the schoolyard incident. None of it could be dismissed as random or just instinct. It was something deeper, an invisible thread that bound them, beyond logic or protocol. "He's been on the battlefield long enough," Lily said, her voice small but firm. "If he needs healing, our home can be the place for that. I've learned to care for him, to read his eyes when he remembers something painful. I don't want him to leave again." Greer exhaled, heavy but not angry. He nodded, a rare expression of respect from someone who wore command. "Then prove it," he said. "We'll send a behavioral specialist and a support trainer. If over the next 2 weeks Rex, this dog, stabilizes and responds well, he stays, permanently. But you must be serious. This isn't a child's game anymore." As the military vehicle drove off, leaving behind faint clouds of dust, Lily turned to Rex and whispered, like a vow, "I'll keep learning. I'll train with you. I won't let anyone think you're useless, because I know you never were." Rex lifted his head, stepped closer, and gently pressed his damp nose into her open palm. In that quiet act was trust, not spoken, but deeply felt. News of the meeting between the Walker family and the military spread through Millstone like a breeze over summer fields, carrying curiosity and concern. People who once watched Lily walking a scarred K9 around the town square now spoke with a new seriousness. They no longer called Rex that old dog or war beast. Instead, they began to whisper the name Shadow with a vague reverence, as if a long-forgotten memory had stirred in the town's shared conscience. A week later, at the suggestion of the local council, and with Captain Greer's advice, a public meeting was held at the town hall, a space usually reserved for mundane matters like public funding or farmers' market permits. But that day, the old wooden room overflowed with familiar faces, neighbors, parents, teachers, and students, all wanting to know what would become of the dog who had once been a soldier. Lily sat in the front row with her mother and grandmother. Rex, for the first time, was allowed inside the town hall, sitting quietly at her feet, always looking toward the door, as if waiting for something still to come. Lily ran her hand gently over his head, reassuring both of them. When it was her turn, Lily stepped up to the podium. She wore a clean but faded navy blue dress, her hair braided neatly, and notes held tightly in one hand. But she didn't read them. She simply looked out over the familiar faces, Ms. Harper, the teacher, the plumber, the florist, and began to speak with her voice, soft but clear and full of emotion. "I don't know much about war or the military," Lily began, "but I know one thing. Rex, or Shadow, isn't just a dog. He once protected someone, saved someone, felt fear and pain just like a person, and now he needs someone to protect him back. I think if a dog fought to keep people safe, then we, who live in peace, should do the same for him." No one spoke. No one smiled. Silence spread across the room like an invisible embrace. Then Luke stepped up, holding an old photograph of his brother in uniform, standing beside a K9. He spoke about the day his brother was saved by a dog like Rex, and how not everyone could understand that. But those who had seen it never forgot. "These dogs," Luke said, "aren't tools. They're soldiers. And like any soldier returning from war, they need love, not abandonment." As the room sat in quiet reflection, the back doors creaked open. A tall man entered, his beard thick, his faded army coat slung loosely, a backpack over one shoulder. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on the dog at Lily's feet. No one had time to ask his name, because it was Rex who moved first. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply walked toward the man, like something long buried had suddenly been unearthed. When the man softly said, "Shadow," his voice rough as the desert wind, the dog lifted his head and met his eyes, and exhaled a long, silent breath. "My name is Marcus Sloan," the man said, turning to face the room. "I trained this dog in Unit 42, Afghanistan. I lost him in an explosion, and I've never forgiven myself since." No documents, no barcodes, and no files were needed. The eyes of man and dog bore witness to the bond between them. Marcus knelt, hand outstretched to gently touch Rex's neck, not as a master but as an estranged brother. And Rex, still quiet, leaned into his leg as if reclaiming a part of himself that had been missing. "I didn't come to take him," Marcus said, turning to Lily. "I came to thank you for doing what we adults, thinking we know right from wrong, failed to do, giving him a chance to begin again." The town hall broke into soft, genuine applause. The mayor stood and solemnly announced that Rex would stay in Millston under the K-9 rehabilitation program, with Marcus serving as mentor and evaluator. That evening, as light rain began to fall, Lily sat on the porch, Rex beside her, and Marcus across from them with a warm mug in hand. Not many words were said, but in the silence was something stronger than any promise. A past made gentler, a present understood, and a future uncertain but full of hope. After the town hall meeting, a windless afternoon wrapped around Millston like a thin blanket drawn over old memories. On the Walker's porch, under the amber leaves of early autumn, Marcus Sloan sat across from Lily and Rex, still clutching a chipped ceramic mug, as if afraid to let go of something more fragile than tea. And then, breaking the kind of silence no one dared disturb, Marcus began to speak, not with the booming voice of a soldier, but in the soft cadence of a sorrowful hymn echoing through post-war stillness. "Back then, I was a first sergeant in Charlie Platoon, a combat engineering unit stationed out of Fort Hardwell, and Rex, then called Shadow, was my K-9, trained to detect explosives, clear paths, and protect lives. He wasn't just a dog. He was a teammate, a friend who lived and died by the second in the dust and fire of Afghanistan." Lily was still. Her hand gently brushed over the graying fur on Rex's shoulder, and as if sensing the emotion pulsing through her touch, Rex stretched his neck and nuzzled into her palm, a silent confirmation that Marcus's words were true, that these were blood and earth memories etched into every scar on his body. Shadow was never late. On every mission, he'd be 3 steps ahead of me, nose to the ground, ears pricked like he was listening to every grain of sand, every unfamiliar scent. One time, in the hills 10 miles from Kandahar, we were clearing a path we thought was already swept, but Shadow stopped. He didn't bark. He just looked up at me, with this look I'll never forget. Then he turned around and pulled me back. 10 seconds later, the ground exploded. If he hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here telling you this. Marcus paused. He took a sip of tea that had long gone cold. No one mentioned the passing time. It had paused itself around his words, each memory hanging like another frame in the Walker's old kitchen, ready to be added to the wall of unnamed stories, now soon to have one told by the heart. The blast happened in the last month of our deployment. We were sent to support a convoy under attack. There was smoke, gunfire, screaming. I got hit, shrapnel in my left leg, and I went down. When I came to, Shadow was standing over me, shielding me, even though he was scratched and bleeding. I thought I was dreaming, but when I blacked out again, it was his barking that led the others to us. A heavy stillness settled in. Lily clenched her fists. Rex remained motionless, ears slightly tilted, eyes focused on Marcus as if he were reliving it all over again. "We got out," Marcus continued, "but Shadow disappeared. They said maybe he panicked and ran into the firefight. Some said he died. I never believed he'd run, but I couldn't find him. I wrote in the report, Shadow, missing in action, presumed KIA, and I added one line, never leave anyone behind. Marcus pulled down his collar slightly, revealing a deep scar on his left shoulder. This I kept as a piece of shadow. I brought it home, back to my wife, and lived with the guilt that never left. Until someone from Fort Hardwell called me. They said, we might have found Shadow, and so I came. He looked at Lily, with a gaze that held both gratitude and the realization that he was no longer the sole keeper of this story. Lily, Marcus said, his voice suddenly soft, I know you've loved Rex with your whole soul, and I didn't come here to take him back. I came to thank you for finding him when we'd lost hope, for giving him what the military, the doctors, even I couldn't, a real home. Lily was crying by then. Not loud sobs, just a quiet stream of tears trailing down her cheeks and soaking into Rex's warm fur. She bent down, resting her cheek on his head, whispering, I won't let him go again. Then, to everyone's surprise, Rex stepped toward Marcus and stood tall. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't scratch. He simply stood, eyes locked with the soldiers as if to say, I'm still here. Then, slowly, he sat and bowed his head, resting his snout gently on Marcus's worn military boots, as if saluting an old commander one last time before returning to the girl who now held his heart. At that moment, no words were needed. Everything had already been said, through scars, glances, silence, and the unconditional love of an 11-year-old girl for a soul that once lost its way in war's shadow. After that emotional afternoon when Marcus told his story, something shifted inside Rex. He lay beside Lily on the wooden porch, his eyes, once hollow, now carried a faint, gentle gleam, as if the memories had stopped haunting and started healing, giving space for the warmth of the present to take root. Lily had fallen asleep on the old rocking chair, her hand still loosely wrapped around the canvas collar she'd stitched with red thread, red like the heart, like hope, like things that can't be spoken aloud. But that night, a violent storm broke over Millstone. Rain poured through the pine trees behind the house like a flood unleashed. Wind tore at the old doors, and thunder cracked like echoes from a battlefield that had never truly slept. When Elena noticed the back kennel door was wide open and Rex's collar lay on the porch step, the porch light flickered, like a signal that something was wrong. Lily woke with a jolt. "Where's Rex?" she asked, her voice choked. No one had an answer. Only the darkness outside and the rain slicing through leaves like knives, sending a cold fear straight to the heart. From a drawer, Hattie pulled out an old army poncho. Marcus, without being told, laced up his old combat boots. Luke, though unprepared, grabbed a flashlight and ran after Lily without a second's hesitation. The four of them plunged into the woods behind the house, where the thunder merged with the wind, and the dirt path had turned to thick, sucking mud under their shaking steps. "Rex!" Lily shouted, until her voice was hoarse, clutching the flickering flashlight like a tiny heart trying to keep beating in a world that had lost direction. Every time lightning split the sky, she scanned the trees, praying to see the silhouette she knew by heart, but found only shadows, stretching and moaning like ghosts in the wind. They searched for hours in the freezing woods, until Lily's legs were caked in mud and her lips turned blue from the cold. Still, she didn't stop. She couldn't. "I promised Rex no one would abandon him again. I won't abandon him," she whispered to herself. A silent prayer. Then, like a miracle amid despair, a bark rang out from beyond the trees. It wasn't a bark of panic, not a cry for help. It was strong and decisive, like a command, a soldier's warning. Marcus froze and raised his hand. Everyone stilled. Then they ran, crashing through the soaked trees, following that voice like it was a compass made of faith. Finally, in a muddy clearing near a flooded stream, they saw Rex. He stood guard over a small, curled-up figure beneath a tree. A boy, no older than Lily, soaked through, lips purple, clutching a torn backpack. Rex didn't look away from the woods. He growled softly, ready to defend the child from whatever danger might still be out there in the storm. Marcus was the first to kneel beside the boy, checking his breath. "He's alive," he said quietly. "But we need to get him out. Now!" Lily rushed over, tears mixing with the rain. She knelt beside Rex, stroking his soaked fur. "I was scared you'd left me forever," she sobbed. Rex licked her hand once and let out a soft, low whine. Not a bark, but a sound from deep inside, like the soul of a wanderer finally finding his way home. They later learned the boy was Ethan Morales, the son of a forestry worker staying temporarily in the west end of town. Ethan had gone missing that afternoon, launching an overnight search. No one expected that an old, broken dog would be the one to find him and stay with him through a storm in the woods. As the group returned home, the porch light at the Walker's house glowed steadily once more. In that soft light, Lily and Rex walked side by side, her hand clutching the canvas collar, and Rex pacing steadily, step by step like a seasoned soldier who'd found his way back, not fleeing from fear anymore, but walking toward the light of the place he now called home. And in Lily's heart, one truth shone brighter than ever. Rex never really left. He was doing what he was born to do, protect. But this time, he came back not because of orders, but because of love. The morning after the storm, as the sun crept above the distant hills, and its first light slipped through the cracked wooden window, the kitchen in the Walker house still smelled of wet earth, damp blankets, and the breath of a sleepless night. Rex lay beside Lily's feet, eyes half shut but ears alert to every passing step. Marcus sat nearby, holding a cup of black coffee, his eyes distant, fixed on the yard as if haunted by the image of the dog standing guard in the forest. Like time itself had looped back to the day he'd been saved by this very animal. When the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the silence, every gaze turned toward the door. A woman stepped out, gray blouse, platinum hair tied neatly back, sharp but not cold eyes. She carried the discipline of the military in her posture, but the gentleness of compassion in her face. She held up an ID badge and said simply, "I'm Dr. Amelia Foster, a senior veterinary officer with the Canine Operations Coordination Division. I'm here to see Rex, also known as Shadow." Lily gently squeezed Rex's fur, as if asking for his approval. Rex lifted his head, then slowly stood up and walked toward the door. Not defensive, not welcoming, just steady, like the instincts of a soldier who never truly forgot his duty, only waited for the right moment to awaken it. Dr. Amelia knelt, extending a hand, not to touch but to offer space, the way one would with a soul that carries wounds deeper than the skin. Rex sniffed, then exhaled softly. Only then did she speak. "This boy was once recorded as one of the fastest reflex cases we'd ever trained," she said, looking around the room, her tone measured but full of depth. "But also one of the most neurologically sensitive, and that wasn't by chance." The room grew heavier. Lily straightened in her seat. Marcus furrowed his brow. Mrs. Hattie set her teacup down without a sound, as though her nurse's intuition already braced for something hard to hear. Dr. Amelia continued, this time speaking directly to Lily, right into the eyes of a child who waited for the truth adults usually hide. For a short time, when the Department of Defense approved trials to enhance canine reflexes in the field, a select few dogs were administered a neurotransmitter-boosting compound. It didn't cause immediate harm, but it heightened sensory perception and responsiveness to an extreme degree. "You mean Rex was experimented on?" Marcus asked quietly, not quite believing it. "Not forced," Amelia replied. "He passed the tests willingly, but the cost—" Her eyes softened as she looked at Rex. "Was that sounds like gunfire? The smell of blood even changes in human emotion." His brain registered them in sharp, overwhelming detail. Rex didn't just hear, he felt. He didn't just see, he analyzed. That's why he didn't just save lives. He knew when others wouldn't act. A silence fell, broken only by the ticking clock. Rex stood beside Lily, his eyes locked on Dr. Amelia as if recognizing pieces of a buried truth in her voice. There was no anger in him, no fear, just acknowledgement of a part of himself that had remained hidden for far too long. Lily spoke, her voice quiet but clear. So he's not broken. He's just survived something no dog should have had to. Dr. Amelia nodded. You're right. And you gave him something we never dared try, a home without commands, a heart without conditions. Marcus exhaled deeply, but for the first time, a small smile touched his lips. Then this soldier found the right platoon after all. As the sun climbed higher, Dr. Amelia reached into her coat and pulled out an old leather collar, worn and darkened with age. A steel tag clung to it, the engraving faint. Shadow, Unit B-14. No man left behind. This used to be his, she said, but I think it belongs to Rex now. Lily accepted it with trembling hands. She removed the hand-stitched canvas collar and gently fastened the old leather one around Rex's neck. Rex licked her hand once. Thank you, without words. Dr. Amelia stood, adjusting her coat. I'll update the records. Rex won't be recalled, but if you allow, I'd like to visit next month. Not as a doctor, but as someone who once believed in him. Lily nodded. We'll be here. I think he'll be waiting too. Rex stepped onto the porch, standing at the top of the steps where sunlight returned for the first time since the storm. In his eyes, there was no fear, no fatigue, only clarity. A life once lost to war now stood in the light of a new beginning, born from old wounds and the pieces once thought beyond recovery. After the emotional farewell with Dr. Amelia Foster, a calm settled over the Walker home. They now understood more about Rex, the hidden scars, the military secrets, the strange behaviors. But as Mrs. Hattie said while releasing her grip on her cold teacup, sometimes the past doesn't truly heal until you meet someone who was in it with you. And then someone returned. He arrived one afternoon, as pale sunlight stretched across the backyard, casting long shadows from the old oak. A beat-up pickup truck rolled to a stop at the edge of the dirt path, its engine coughing once before going still. A man stepped out, thin, disheveled, with wild gray hair and a beard like he hadn't seen a mirror in weeks. His eyes were cloudy and deep, like a lake after a storm. He carried nothing but a small cloth bag and a wrinkled envelope. Lily saw him first. She ran inside to call Hattie. Then Marcus stepped out, squinting. He was the first to speak, voice low and steady. Thomas Keller? The man nodded, no smile, no words. But Rex responded differently. The dog, who had been resting near the porch, suddenly stood, alert, drawn forward by something wordless. He approached slowly, cautiously, his gaze locked on the man. Not protective, but identifying. This was not instinct. This was a memory. Keller didn't move. Then he dropped to one knee. Shadow, he whispered, barely audible. But Rex heard and stepped forward. No growl, no hesitation, just a long breath as he gently rested his head on the man's knee, exactly as he'd done with Lily on their very first night. Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on Keller's shoulder. You remember now? Keller nodded. I remember everything. They invited him inside. Mrs. Hattie made tea. Lily quietly set out a fresh bowl of water for Rex. In the little wooden room, everything grew still, as if the house itself held its breath to hear a chapter of history that had never been told. Keller sat in the chair by the window, his hands trembling as he opened the envelope. Inside was a faded photo. A group of soldiers sitting in the desert, rare smiles on sunburnt faces. In the center, a sharp-eyed German shepherd. Rex, Shadow. Holding the photo in both hands, Keller began, his voice echoing as it rose from a deep well. I was the only one who survived the ambush at Ardashan, he said. We were lured into a dead zone. Grenades, mortars, machine guns. It all came at once. I was hit in the leg and pinned beneath rubble. No one found me except Shadow. He paused, eyes fixed on Rex, making sure he wasn't imagining. He came back, through the gunfire, dragged me out, covered me with his own body. He cried when I passed out. I remember that sound. His final whine. I thought I'd carry it to my grave, but I woke up in a hospital. They told me Shadow was missing. I never spoke of it again. Not because no one asked, but because I couldn't open my mouth without breaking down. Lily sat frozen, clutching Rex's fur like she was holding on to something sacred now alive in the room. So why are you here today? Keller looked up. Because I heard the story. From a veteran in my therapy group. About a girl in Millstone who saved a K9 once thought lost. And in my heart, I knew it was him. He reached out, gently placing a hand on Rex's head. I didn't come to take anything back. I came to finally live. No one said anything. Because they didn't need to. What had just taken place wasn't a reunion. It was healing. Keller stayed for dinner. He shared small stories. How Rex would wait silently outside the infirmary until wounded soldiers regained consciousness. How he'd only stand night guard if the person he protected had been crying. Stories not found in any military file, but etched into the hearts of those who owed him their lives. That night, Lily stood at the window, watching Rex lying between Marcus and Keller in the yard, a living bridge between two generations of lost soldiers, now found through the silent loyalty of a dog. She said nothing, just drew a small heart on the glass with her finger. Inside that heart now lived a dog, not called Shadow anymore, as in the past, but Rex, a name that meant the light you wait for and never give up on. The next morning, as the sun tilted over the small hill behind the house, Lily opened her bedroom window and looked down at the backyard where Rex had spent the night, lying between Marcus and Mr. Keller. Now he was pacing slowly along the wooden fence, occasionally stopping to sniff the tender grass, his tail swaying like a small flag rediscovering the wind. There was something different in the way Rex moved that morning. Something lighter, as if part of the shadow that had clung to him had finally lifted. After Mr. Keller's visit, it felt like the walkers had entered a new chapter. Hattie, usually the most emotionally reserved, was the first to voice the idea. If Rex's past was once forgotten, then maybe it's time we do something to remember it. She said it one evening as 3 generations sat around the old kitchen table, the scent of apple pie in the air, and the sound of rain tapping gently on the tin roof. Lily looked up from her sketchpad. Marcus placed a hand on Rex's back. No one argued. And so what started as a fragile spark, like a candle in the dark, turned into a warm flame, a day to honor retired K9 dogs. The town of Millstone seemed to need something to bring it together, too. When Lily and Grandma Hattie spoke to the school principal and reached out to local veterans, no one said no. People offered chairs, old photographs, and flyers. The town bakery even volunteered to bake a massive cake shaped like a bone, with white icing that read, "Thank you to our 4-legged heroes." The celebration took place at the Central Park, beneath maple trees just beginning to turn. The sky was bright and clear, as if scrubbed clean by a town's shared effort to say thank you. American flags and K9 unit banners hung from wooden posts along the main path. Children ran around with dog-shaped balloons, while the older veterans sat quietly together, their eyes more expressive than any stories they might have told. Rex walked beside Lily, not on a military chain, but on a soft rope leash, something tied with affection, not authority. Around his neck was a brown scarf, hand-stitched by Hattie with a single word, hero. There was no parade, no drum roll, but Rex's steady steps silenced the space around him. Something in his eyes, calm, seasoned, and newly gentle, made adults lower their sunglasses and children step back in awe, as if nature itself was making way for a quiet river to flow through. The formal ceremony took place on the main lawn. Principal Bennett began with statistics. How many missions, how many lives were saved by K9s? But when Lily stepped onto the small wooden stage, holding the microphone in both hands, no one was listening to the numbers anymore. "I don't have big words," she began, not trembling, not shouting. "I just want to say thank you for coming back." Silence spread like ripples. Then Lily walked to Rex, knelt, and hugged him. "And if anyone has a dog who once served, who was hurt, who was left behind, today I hope they know, you were never forgotten." The first person to come forward was an elderly woman holding a faded photograph of a Belgian Malinois named Sarge, wearing a soldier's cap. She said he saved her husband during a bombing. Then came a little boy in a wheelchair, alongside a dog named Blue, now blind in one eye. Each story told was another piece restoring the memory of the town. When Marcus's turn came, he didn't say much. He stood behind Rex, placed a hand on the dog's head, and whispered, "Today, you don't have to serve anyone. Just know we're all here for you." And in that moment, Rex, who had been quiet all day, lifted his head, stepped forward, and sat calmly. A wordless acceptance. Grandma Hattie then handed out hand-stitched cloth badges reading, "Faithful always to every K9 present," whether old, limping, or living only in memory. And Lily carefully tied small scarves around each dog's neck, just as she had done for Rex that very first night under the porch. As the sun softened into late afternoon, the crowd began to leave. But Lily and Rex remained on the grass. Rex rested his head on her lap, eyes half closed, tail gently thumping in rhythm with the breeze. The sky wasn't past or future. It was now a present moment where warriors with 4 legs were remembered not with salutes, but with gentle hands and hearts that had learned how to open. The day after the K9 celebration, the grounds of Millstone Middle School still carried the echo of stories shared at the park, as if the air itself had been softened by gratitude. Students who had once mocked Lily, who had called Rex cruel names, now approached her with different eyes, not quite full of guilt, but with quiet acknowledgement that they had misunderstood something worth honoring. The change didn't stay in glances. It took root in action. Principal Bennett, who had once hesitated during the schoolyard incident, was the first to propose a new idea: the founding of a student support club centered around therapy dogs, inspired by Lily and Rex's journey. At the school board meeting, she said, "If a dog who's survived war can help heal a child's heart, then why can't he help more?" And so began a program Millstone had never seen, not built on big budgets or complicated planning, but on the quiet confidence of people who had seen a miracle firsthand. On the club's launch day, there were no guest speakers, only Lily. She stood beside Rex, wearing a white shirt with frayed edges, holding the soft rope leash with both hands. "Rex never says much," she said, "but he understands everything, even the kind of fear that you can't put into words." The Therapy Paws Club opened every Wednesday and Friday in a small room beside the library, once used to store old supplies. Mrs. Hattie served as the main instructor, teaching how to care for animals and how to engage respectfully with therapy dogs. Marcus provided support on psychological responses from dogs with combat experience. And Lily, at just 13, became a quiet role model for her peers through her unwavering gentleness. Rex was given a blue scarf embroidered with the club's emblem and the words, "In service of healing." When he wore it, he entered the school not as a protector on edge, but as a quiet nurse. One afternoon, a boy named Max, struggling with social anxiety, spent lunch break simply leaning his head on Rex's back without speaking a word. Another day, a student who had been bullied broke down during a session, and Rex, sensing the tremble in the girl's voice, gently rested his head on her knee. No words were needed. His presence softened the room. One afternoon, Rex was assigned a special task: to sit beside a girl named Amy during a math test, where she often panicked under pressure. After the exam, Amy whispered to Lily, "You know, when Rex was next to me, I could hear him breathe, and I knew I wasn't alone." That single sentence silenced Mrs. Hattie, because it echoed what so many soldiers had once said about K9s in the field, that when it felt like everything was about to be lost, The sound of a dog breathing beside you was the only rhythm keeping your heart from giving up. Soon, the club outgrew its little room. The library began hosting Read Aloud with Rex sessions, where students read stories aloud to the dog to overcome their fear of speaking publicly. Some teachers began integrating lessons on empathy, emotional awareness, and conflict resolution through watching Rex, who always listened without interrupting, and who never judged. And so, from a forgotten warrior, Rex became a quiet leader for a generation wrestling with silent wounds. There were no medals, no flags, no gun salutes, just small hands stroking his back, softened sighs at the end of long days, and Rex's steady eyes, looking not with judgment but with affirmation. You matter, even if you don't know how to say it yet. By the end of the month, the school held a small exhibition in the main hallway. Photos of students with Rex, handwritten notes, and heartfelt drawings. The centerpiece was a crayon sketch by Lily. Rex sitting in the grass, with a line of handwritten text beneath it, clear and sure. Healing takes time, and someone who stays. Afternoons at Millstone High had grown shorter, signaling that summer was near. On the school's main bulletin board, the bold red letters of Class of 2025 Graduation Ceremony stood out among flyers and announcements. But this year, it wasn't just the seniors looking forward to the special day. In the back courtyard, where sunlight filtered through the white rose trees, an old dog sat quietly, watching the world with the eyes of someone who had seen too many goodbyes. Rex was no longer just part of the therapy club. With a scarf-embroidered mentor tied gently around his neck, he had become part of the school itself, a living witness to the growth of many students. But no bond was deeper than the one he shared with Lily, who had laid the first stone in his path to healing through nothing more than quiet determination. And today, she would step onto the school's main stage, not just as a graduating student, but as a storyteller of something Millstone had never forgotten. Lily walked onto the stage in a simple cream dress, her hair tied low at the nape, hands clutching a folded sheet of paper, creased where she'd stayed up late, perfecting every word. Rex waited just below the stage stairs, eyes fixed on her with unwavering attention. She began in a calm, steady voice. There are people who graduate with a diploma, and then there are people like me, who graduate alongside a soul that never left their side. The auditorium grew quiet, not for the sake of ceremony, but because of the way Lily spoke, as if each sentence was a heartbeat. She didn't hide the truth, that she'd once been mocked, lost sleep from nightmares, and believed she might never be strong enough to do anything meaningful. But one day, she saw a pair of eyes, hollow, lost, inside kennel number 14 at the shelter, and everything began to change. That dog wasn't a miracle. He couldn't fly, couldn't talk, and he used to panic at fireworks. But every day he taught me that trust isn't something you demand. It's something you offer, again and again, in silence, with presence. Lily paused for a breath. Then she called gently, a familiar phrase, "Rex, guard." Everyone held their breath. From the seats below, Rex, his muzzle and legs now dusted with gray, stood up, walking slowly but purposefully toward her. Each step carried memories once broken, now stitched together by patience and hope. When he reached her side, the audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered, not for a speech, but for a journey of healing that began in an old backyard kennel. The principal, who had once questioned the need for a therapy dog, was the first to approach, bending down to stroke Rex's head and whispering, "Thank you, soldier." Then came the teachers, students, and even the doubters, each offering a gentle pat, a look, or a hand on Lily's shoulder. When the ceremony ended, a special photo was printed and mounted on the school's Hall of Fame. In it, Lily stood center stage, hand resting on Rex's back. Both gazed out toward the applauding crowd. No barrier between species, just connection. Beneath the photo, written in chalk, "Not all heroes wear medals. Some just need to be called by their name." After graduation, Millstone was no longer the same. Even the sunlight seemed softer, the wind across the town square carrying a trace of something long needed. Something healed. People began to speak of Rex as part of the town's shared memory, not with loud admiration, but with quiet reverence, as if speaking his name meant touching something deep in themselves, unspoken hurts, unnamed scars, long buried and rarely acknowledged. Then, from Lily's idea, a small statue began construction behind the town library. Not in the busy square, but in a quiet corner where children liked to read under the trees, and veterans often paused during early morning walks. It was the perfect place for memory. Not showy, not forgotten. The statue wasn't tall, chest height to an adult, cast in dark bronze alloy with a hint of steel gray, a color that recalled the gear worn by those who had shielded others. Rex was sculpted in exact detail, from each fur line to the gentle crease by his eyes. But what touched people most wasn't the form. It was the gaze. His eyes were carved to face the horizon. Not aggressive, not uncertain, just resolute. The gaze of a soul that had fought, lost, and been called back. Not by command, but by love. Beneath the statue was a bronze plaque, engraved in Lily's careful handwriting. No name, no year, just a single line. For the forgotten souls who still keep watch. On the unveiling day, the sky held no sun, but no rain either. The whole town gathered behind the library. Mrs. Hattie brought a bouquet of white flowers wrapped in an old military handkerchief. Marcus, dressed in uniform, hands trembling, removed the cloth covering the statue. Thomas Keller, who had once gone years without speaking, placed an old dog tag at the statue's base, then quietly stepped back into the crowd. Rex, in a red scarf trimmed with gold, was led forward by Lily. Though his body had weakened with age, he stood as tall as he could, his eyes locked on the statue, as if recognizing himself, or the fallen comrades who never made it home. Lily leaned down and whispered in his ear, "No one forgets you now, Rex. No one dares." At that moment, a soft breeze passed through, like a touch from the invisible souls who still stood watch over homes, hearts, and peaceful dreams. From that day on, children often sat and studied near the statue, sometimes tapping the plaque and smiling. "Hi, Rex." Older folks brought chairs and read the newspaper beside it. On every Memorial Day, flowers circled the base, not from obligation, but from silent gratitude. And Rex, though his legs had grown stiff, still made the trip with Lily each week. Once he stood for a long time, eyes fixed on the inscription. It was as if, in that silence, he was listening to something only old souls could understand. A thank you, unspoken, a goodbye without tears, and a promise that he, like so many others, would never be forgotten again. Ever since Rex's statue was placed behind the town library, that little patch of garden had become part of Millstone's soul, a quiet place where people entrusted the things they couldn't put into words. And from that place, Lily grew up, not through leaps or grand moments of glory, but through quiet, steady steps, like breathing, like Rex's faithful pace beside her, always silent, never stopping. She carried with her the memory of those first days, the day she brought Rex home from the shelter, the nights they slept together listening to the wind, the times he was misunderstood, and the mornings she realized he was slowly coming back to life. Each of those memories was a red thread woven into her life. Now 18, approaching the end of high school, Lily still rose early each morning to walk with Rex around the yard, even though his steps had slowed and his breath carried the sound of time. Each time she brushed his silver-flecked coat, she remembered. This was a soul once forgotten, who had been brought back to life through simple love. That was why she chose the path that had long been quietly etched in her heart. Veterinary medicine. Not just to heal wounds of the body, but to listen for the fractures no one else could see. The ones she had learned to recognize in Rex's eyes. She didn't just want to be a vet. She wanted to open a rehabilitation center just for retired K-9s, silent warriors who once carried human lives on their shoulders, only to be discarded when the battlefield forgot them. She called it something simple, but rich with meaning: the field station. Because to her, any place with wrecks, wildflowers, and love was a field of freedom and unwavering light. As she prepared her college applications, Lily mapped every step of her vision. She visited veteran groups, police departments with retired K-9s, and shelters that took in working dogs. She learned how to apply for grants, design treatment protocols, and, together with Luke, now a social work student, develop therapy curriculums pairing people with dogs. Each evening, as Rex curled up beside her bed with his head resting on her foot, Lily would lean down and whisper, "I'll make it happen. You taught me how not to give up." Rex remained the heartbeat of her world. Though visibly older, every time Lily returned from a shift at the local vet clinic, he would still lift his head and walk a few slow steps toward her. No barking, no bounding, just that gaze, the same one he gave her in the shelter all those years ago, silent, trusting, and infinitely understanding. At a community forum where Lily presented her rehab center plan, she spoke about Rex, not through tears or tragedy, but with warmth. There was once a dog who wouldn't look at anyone, and then, one day, he looked at me. That gaze changed my life. I believe there are souls, left behind in the dark, who only need one person to reach out at the right time, and they'll come back toward the light. The room was silent. Then came applause, more like a prayer than praise, for the unspoken lives still waiting to be seen. Rex didn't understand her words, but when she got home that night, he pressed his head to her leg, just like he did the first time under the moonlight, as if to say, "I still understand you, even without language." And Lily knew, deep in her heart, that she was never alone on this path, because her first light had come from the eyes of a dog once forgotten, but who never stopped guarding what was good. One early spring morning, as apple blossoms unfurled by the window and cool breezes swept the porch with the breath of a new season, Lily stepped outside. She knew Rex would be there, just like always, lying on the old worn mat beneath the porch, beneath the spot where he had stood guard at every sunset. But today, there was something slower in his body, something stiller in his presence. His eyes no longer burned with instinct. They shimmered with the calm of a lake after a long storm. Rex could no longer stand to greet her, but his ears twitched gently when she called his name, and his tail moved, just enough for Lily to know he was still listening, still feeling the world, still there. She knelt beside him, pulling over the earth-colored wool blanket Hattie had knitted him the winter before, and gently laid her hand on his head, where scars once lived, now covered in soft gray. The wind blew through her fingers, mixing spring blossoms, warm wood, and the familiar scent of Rex into something wordless and alive. She whispered, her voice breaking into the stillness. "I'm still here, and so are you. You were never abandoned because I saw you from the very beginning." Rex blinked once, his final answer, and in that gaze, Lily saw it all. The dusty kennel, the schoolyard ridicule, the wounds no one saw, the thunderstorm in the woods, the silent watching from under the porch. Rex had never just been a wounded dog. He was memory itself, loyalty incarnate, the final heartbeat of something sacred that the modern world had tried to forget. Unconditional love. That day, Rex left this world in silence. No barking, no crying, only sunlight tilted across the porch, draping his body in a gentle golden glow, as if even the sky paused to honor a soldier's farewell. His funeral was held under the apple tree in the backyard, the same place where he had first looked up at Lily, and now, where he rested. More people came than Lily ever expected. Not just classmates and teachers or veterans, but children he had comforted through anxiety, elders he had sat beside while they remembered their youth. Someone placed a small plaque at the tree's base. It read, "You're no longer here, but you taught us the most important truth. Loyalty asks for nothing. It only asks to be seen. That same year, construction began on Millstone's first Canine Rehabilitation Center, its official name, Rex Station. Every day, dogs who had survived war, abandonment, aging, or trauma came there, not just to be cared for, but to be understood. And everyone who walked through the center's doors saw a large portrait in the main hall, Rex with his head held high, not staring at battlefields or enemies, but looking straight into the heart of the viewer, as if to ask, "Are you ready to believe in what once broke?" Lily, now the young director of the center, still took daily walks with the newest arrivals. Her steps echoed those years by Rex's side. When someone asked her what gave her the strength to follow this path, she simply smiled, eyes lit like they did when it all began, and said, "Being broken doesn't mean being useless. Sometimes it means you're ready to help someone else heal." The story didn't end with goodbyes or tears, but with another beginning. Rex, through his quiet courage, became a symbol, not just for the girl who saw light in his eyes, but for an entire community that learned to look again, listen better, and love what the world had once forgotten. And maybe someday, if you visit the center in spring, when petals fall on the porch roof, you might hear soft footsteps in the grass, the kind that sounds like a dog running through a field. Maybe it's Rex still watching over the dreams of souls trying to find their way home. In a world loud and rushing, where worth is often measured in strength and speed, a dog named Rex, once dismissed as broken, quietly proved that loyalty and love never age, never weaken, and never disappear. With a single gaze and a few steps beside a girl who believed, he taught a town to remember the sacred. And you? Have you ever met a Rex, a soul once wounded, but who chose to love you completely anyway? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs a reason to believe in goodness again, and follow us for more true stories, where even the smallest kindness can carry the greatest healing. Thank you for listening. Rex may have been just a dog, but the legacy he left is forever.